Hello everyone, welcome to Social Psychology, Psychology 346, and today we're going to be talking about emotion. Now, emotions are extremely common in everyday life. We experience, we express, and witness emotions all the time. But what exactly is an emotion? Well, first, it's important to distinguish between different terms that we might associate with the term feelings or affect. So, when we talk about feelings, we can experience affect, mood, or emotion. Affect is this kind of automatic response of or feeling of something being good or bad. Mood is a feeling state that is not clearly linked to a certain event, so we may just be in a bad mood or good mood for no apparent reason. And then emotion is what we focus on when we have an evaluative reaction to some event. We experience sadness because a friend passed away recently, or we experience anger because someone cut us off on the road. So again, affect is when we categorize something as good or bad as fast as possible. Quicker than we can recognize a target, quicker than we can categorize it into a specific subgroup. This happens instantaneously. Mood is this kind of diffuse form of affect that continues on even after we've encountered a stimulus. Persists over time, and it's more of a general feeling. We no longer associate this feeling with a specific object or situation, etc. Moods, similar to affect and similar to emotions, can greatly influence our thoughts and behaviors. Especially moods can influence whether or not we process information heuristically or systematically. And generally, if we're in a good mood, we don't really focus on our environment. We use heuristic processing. We don't pay attention to a lot of stimuli in the situation. But if we're in a bad mood, that means we're not in a good place. So we want to change that. So we're going to focus in on our environment, use more systematic processing, and try and find something in the situation or in the environment that can shift us from a bad mood to a good mood. But again, we're going to be focusing on emotion here. And this is a kind of conscious reaction to an event. We experience fear when a bear runs at us, and we are aware that we are experiencing fear. It's not subconscious or automatic. There are different theories of emotion that explain exactly how we come to feel emotions or experience emotions. The Cannon-Bard theory focuses on emotions having two parallel processes. So we have the arousal that's often associated with emotions, such as for fear, for example, increases in heart rate, sweaty palms. And at the same time, we have the experience of fear, or this label of what this arousal is. This includes behavioral responses. Alternatively, the Schachter and Singer theory, which is, for the most part, the generally more accepted theory, is a two-stage model that suggests that we first have arousal, so we have the sweaty palms, increased heart rate, and then we label that arousal. Okay, sweaty palms, we have increased heart rate, I see a bear in the environment, okay, I'm probably experiencing fear right now, so that's what I'm going to label it. This is demonstrated really nicely in the kind of long drawbridge study, where individuals who are on a dangerous bridge are experiencing physiological arousal due to kind of the dangerous nature of where they are. But when they're confronted or when they encounter an experimenter who is of the opposite sex, they actually incorrectly attribute that arousal to sexual attraction for the experimenter. So generally, this works very well, where we're able to correctly attribute our specific physiological feelings to the correct stimulus, but sometimes it goes awry. So there are many different emotions that we as humans can experience, and we do see a lot of the emotions that we experience tend to be relatively universal. So a lot of cross-cultural research has at least determined that there are 6 basic emotions where these expressions of emotions, the facial expressions, are recognized cross-culturally and extremely consistency. So these are happiness, anger, sadness, surprise, fear, and disgust. 5 of these emotions were characters in the movie Inside Out. We do also have some more complex emotions known as the self-conscious emotions, such as envy, shame, guilt, embarrassment, regret, pride, etc. And again, we see that some of these, not only facial expressions, but bodily postures that are associated with these emotions tend to occur cross-culturally. And one really interesting study demonstrated that people have similar body postures associated with pride, depending on or whether or not it's a blind person or a person who can see experiencing pride. So there's something that's not necessarily socially or culturally learned. There's something about this emotion that elicits this specific bodily posture. Another way of understanding emotions is through appraisal theory. This is the idea that emotions are simply byproducts of ways of describing the situation. So if we completely understand a given situation, we can determine what emotion a person is experiencing. So how a person understands the situation. So do they think the situation is pleasant? Do they feel like they have control of the situation? Do they feel like they are responsible for the events that are occurring in the situation? Are they behaving in a moral way? All of these different understandings of an environment or a situation can determine what emotion a person experiences. So that's a description of what emotions are, but why do we experience emotions? Well, there are many different functions of experiencing and expressing emotions. For one, it can provide insight into our true beliefs. So an emotional reaction that we have to a stimulus could help determine what we decide to do on a daily basis. It's especially helpful when making everyday situations that we probably don't need to put a lot of thought into, like what should I have for lunch? It can also help us avoid risky situations or risky options. So if we have a negative emotional reaction to a specific option, we might want to stay away from that. Emotions tend to be more automatic and responsive than thoughts or cognitions or behaviors, for example. Emotions can help initiate approach or avoidance behaviors to stimuli that we encounter in our environment. And it can basically trigger behavioral and biological immune systems. So if we experience disgust when encountering a piece of moldy bread, that's kind of triggering a evolutionarily adaptive immune system to help us avoid that certain stimuli. Additionally, we can sometimes be influenced relatively automatically by our environment through our emotional experiences. So if we associate, for example, clean words with positive emotions, we might be more likely to clean in the future. Additionally, emotions can help us learn from mistakes. So specific emotions, especially the self-conscious emotions, such as shame, guilt, and regret, can all help us make up for poor decisions in our past. Maybe we need to be better about meeting our moral standards or try to get over hurting others. There are some issues with emotions, especially when it comes to decision making. Sometimes the emotion that we experience can lead to poor decision making. So for example, when we're happy, we don't tend to pay attention to stimuli as systematically as we need to. When we're angry, we often overlook important information. Obviously, certain emotions can lead to maladaptive mental health outcomes. So we can see emotions such as shame, regret, guilt lead to disorders such as anxiety disorders, depression, general distress, etc. And our emotions, especially our negative emotions, can drive discriminating behavior and prejudice. So oftentimes we see that prejudice and discrimination are driven by fear or confusion about other groups. So we have different reasons for experiencing emotions, but we also express emotions frequently. And it's extremely important to understand why we express emotions. Oftentimes it's a form of communication. If we discuss after eating a piece of pizza, that's going to signal to other people that maybe we should stay away from that piece of pizza, that there's something wrong with it. If we see someone expressing sadness, that might be a way of communicating to me that I need to comfort them, that they need some friendly hands. Sometimes these expressions can express specific information. So, for example, disgust over the piece of pizza they just ate, or fear over something in the environment that they see. It might signal to someone that, hey, look, there might be a bear in the forest that we need to watch out for. It can elicit specific reactions from other people. So like I said, sadness can elicit help from other people. An example, shame can elicit forgiveness from another person. And it can also be used to connect with other people. So for example, if we express embarrassment, that can lead to reduced instances of aggression from other people. Guilt can help break down intergroup barriers that may have existed. And regret can help form social connections and social bonds. It's also important to make the distinction between sincere expressions of emotion and false expressions. So certain aspects of the face can signal when we're truly smiling. So these are known as Duchenne smiles. So certain aspects, tightening of this area and tightening of this area of the face signal Duchenne smiles compared to other fake smiles, which may not focus on those areas as much. So for example, if I have a pen, if I put it in my mouth like this, that's going to lead to me actually expressing a Duchenne smile. So there is a way of faking it, but it requires kind of an awkward maneuvering of the face. And interestingly enough, we find that people who are forced to put a pen in their mouth and smile like that tend to actually report being a lot happier than people who are asked to smile during using other methods. So we experience emotion, we express emotion, but certain experiences or expressions of emotions are not always socially accepted, depending on a specific situation, or if it's the case where these emotions are leading to mental health issues. So sometimes we want to regulate our emotions. This is known as emotion regulation. This is probably most frequently used to talk about eliminating specific emotional experiences, but it can also refer to extending certain emotional experiences, such as if I'm happy, I want to continue to be happy for as long as possible, so I want to extend that emotional experience. There are different ways of regulating our emotions, some of them focusing on modifying our immediate situation or environment. So for example, situation selection would be an individual maybe who experiences fear a lot in the real world, staying in their house, not leaving. This is an example of agoraphobia. This is one reason why people who do have agoraphobia don't leave their house, because they don't want to experience fear, so they're going to regulate their situation. Other types of regulation focus more on modifying thoughts. So with reappraisal, for example, we think about the same situation in a completely different way that limits or reduces our emotional reactivity or emotional experience. So surgeons, for example, use reappraisal all the time. If they are aware of the fact that they're cutting into another human being every time they perform surgery, they might experience a lot of anxiety or fear whenever they go into surgery. But by reappraising the situation, just thinking about these specific hand movements, taking a more machine-like approach to surgery can allow them to reduce these feelings of fear and anxiety. Another, suppression, also attempts to modify thoughts by having people actively trying to prevent themselves from thinking about a specific, emotion or a specific stimulus in order to reduce that emotional experience. With suppression is actually one of the worst, if not the worst, emotional regulation strategies that can be used. We see something known as the rebound effect, where the simple act of trying not to think of something leads to an increase in the frequency of thinking of that. So if I tell you to not think about white bears, you're going to almost immediately start thinking about white bears and think about white bears more than you would have if I hadn't said anything in the first place. And emotion regulation skills are extremely helpful. They are common in well-adjusted children. They are common in people who are more socially competent, and people who are able to self-regulate and regulate their emotions tend to end up with higher levels of achievement compared to individuals who don't do a good job of self-regulating. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for your time and attention. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.